a lot with Pfizer, and I'm curious to hear about environmentless workflows. So, Dave, you're good to go.
Danke schön. Guten Nachmittag, Drupal Geschäftstag. I've stuffed that one up. Ich bin Dave Hall. Heute werde ich über Workflows sprechen. My German is atrocious, so I'll stick to English for the rest of the presentation.
Thank you very much.
So, yeah. I'll tell you a bit about myself first. Hang on, wrong window. So I started using Drupal back in the days of 4.6. In 2010, I deployed 2,086 production Drupal 6 sites for a client in France. It took around 52 hours for them to roll out. A few years back, I built an advanced site management and deployment system for the largest general insurer in Australia. For the last 4 and a bit years, I've been a contractor at Pfizer, where I'm currently the tech lead for the automation and infrastructure team. We're responsible for ensuring that we can deploy changes for almost, over 800 production Drupal 7 sites, and we've got a few Drupal 8 ones floating around now as well. We manage over 4,000 environments. Now I've got to keep the lawyers happy. I'm not a Pfizer employee. I'm not here representing Pfizer. Anything that I talk about today may or may not be something that Pfizer is currently doing, is considering doing, or has done in the past. If they're doing some of this stuff today, they may not do it tomorrow. If you try any of this yourself, that's your choice. If something breaks, please sue yourself.
Do they really make you read that, Dave?
No, the actual statements on the slides, but I like keeping them very happy by interpreting their words for them.
Okay, thanks.
No worries. So I'm sure that the audience doesn't want to hear about my background or what the lawyers think, so let's get into the talk proper. We'll talk about workflows. Every team has their own workflow. Some holdouts still insist on doing waterfall. These days, most teams prefer to think of themselves as being agile. On the business side, the general workflow is something like prepare a brief, get development done, and then derive value. On the development side, it's very different to the business side. It's grab a ticket, hack on the code, and get paid. Both sides are focused on the outcome, which is generating value or income. Now, how do we get from idea to production as quickly as possible? For about a decade, we've had a workflow that's involved moving changes from dev to stage to production using these fixed environments, and this has been considered best practice. And once you get to production, you should get some cash, be it the business in higher sales or the developer being paid for their efforts. Now, let's look at it in a bit more detail. It goes from dev to stage to production to paid. Did you see the change represented by the ticket move through the environments? I know it's a little late on a Friday afternoon and people have had a lot to take in. So let's go through it again for those who weren't paying attention. It's dev, stage, prod, paid. Oops, that's pretty cool, right? It seems really easy to make money from web projects. I've still got about 23 minutes to go. So let's look at this again. Wham, hang on. We've got a problem here. There's a bug in production. That's okay. We can move the fix through our environments and everyone should still get paid. Let's see how that gets done. So we start off with our change in, we start off by creating a feature branch and then we edit the file that we think is the problem. It's okay. I've promised Evo no live coding demos. After all, it's business days. If you like coding and live demos of code and stuff that's not quite ready, you'll love dev days. But let's get back to the higher level workflow. So here we've got our change starting off in dev, and then we move it to stage. So far, so good. But then we find out that there's actually 2 other tickets sitting on stage waiting for user acceptance testing. That's okay. We can deploy all these changes together this afternoon. Then bam, one of those changes on stage has failed to pass UAT. The whole deployment is now blocked, and the buggy change includes a database schema change, and there's some pending content changes as well. So it looks like we're not going to be feeding the piggy bank today. So how do we avoid these types of situations? Whoops. So some teams might want to introduce stricter processes or more red tape. I don't think that's the answer. Teams need to be freed so they can focus on delivery. I spent a fair bit of time looking at what other people were doing, reviewing the lessons from WF Tools, the previous iteration of my ideas around development workflows. And I realized that Drupal 8 does a lot of things differently. So why don't we consider changing how we develop our sites? I came up with the idea of environmentless workflows. Why environmentless? I need a word to encapsulate the concept. Just like we have Ajax, instead of saying using XML HTTP requests, using JavaScript, or we've got DevOps, we've got NoOps, we've got serverless, there's headless Drupal. Oh, okay, the last one's 2 words, but you get the idea. We need something, so when we are discussing more complex ideas, we can have a simple way of everyone having that common understanding. So the other advantage was that environmentless.io was available, so worked out well. So let's look at what's needed to avoid these types of situations. Oh, hang on. My speaker's notes are wrong. Okay, so how do we get this stuff to work? We need to get rid of the fixed named environments of dev and stage. Dev and stage should purely be state labels. We decouple the state of the change from the environment. So something can be in dev or on stage, but there's no longer environments called that. Each ticket has its own sandbox. And so we, with each sandbox, it relates to a ticket. And a sandbox involves a feature branch in Git. We have the database clone from production, and then we copy the user files from production as well. Or we can use something like stage file proxy. We can also clean up the database a bit, run it through SQL Sanitize if it contains sensitive data, things like that before we hand that over to our developers. Excuse me. But we try to get the sandbox as close as possible to what the development, what the production environment looks like. Now, I know that if you have a very large site that you may need to tweak some of these steps, but we're going to focus on the concept today rather than the nitty-gritty detail.
Dave?
Now,
yeah, you said hang on, and we thought you left. You had to go to the restroom or something, so we took a break too.
Sorry?
Well, the connection broke then, so you can go ahead now. Maybe we missed something, actually.
Okay, so which bit did you get up to?
You were showing the URL environmentless.io,
Oh, okay. All right, cool. We'll just jump back a couple of steps then. So, all right. Sorry about that. I definitely didn't run off to the bathroom. I did that before my talk. I'm a well-prepared speaker.
Show us the piggy bank again.
Yeah. There's more piggy banks and there's more Batman. Just bear with me for a minute. Okay, so what we have, so, whoops, hang on. Yeah, so I was talking about the reason why, oh no, the domain was available. So let's get into how this works. So normally we have dev stage prod. In this model, we decouple the state of the changes of the change set from the actual environment. So we get rid of fixed dev and stage. We still have the concept of dev and stage, but that's just a state for the change set. And so we still have dev, but each dev environment is tied to a ticket. And each dev environment is its own sandbox. So a sandbox contains our code, our database and user files, which are copied from production. So we create a feature branch from prod or the master branch. We copy the database, perform any manipulation that's needed there, such as sanitizing it, or if it's a large database, stripping it down. And we also have the user files. And you do have the option of using something like stage file proxy instead if you want to save a bit of time there. Now, I've lost focus. Here we go. All right, now we have each of our sandboxes. I like to name them after the ticket. So we've got Jira 123, 124, 125, 126. I could ask people in the audience who likes Jira, and I get to find who all the project managers are, but I can't see anyone there, so there's no point in us covering that today. But what we have here is each of these are separate dev environments. Now, what we can do is we can make all the changes here. The developer works in their sandbox. Every time they push changes to the Git branch, the changes get replicated into the sandbox. And ideally, we would create a clone of that sandbox, and we'd run a battery of automated tests against that clone and provide feedback to the developer about any problems if tests are failing. So once we'll assume that all the tests are looking good, and then we want to get these changes to stage. Now, you're probably going, well, how do we get it to stage and onto production? So we have the concept of a build. Now, a build is one or more change sets in a fresh clone of production with those changes merged in. So in this case, our first build, we'll call it build 26. And we'll create a second one called build 28. We don't care what's happened to build 27. It's not a fun thing to talk about, so we'll ignore that for now. And now we've got our two builds, and we're going to have all the tests run again to make sure that things work when we've got more than one change set in that build. But we've got a bug in build 26. So we can't get these changes in from Jira 123 and 124 through to production because we've got this bug. But build 28 has Jira 124 and 126 in it. So what we can do here is if this passes UAT, if This passes UAT. The piggy's happy. See, I told you there was more pigs. And so now our build 28 goes through to production. Nailed it. First time, as my friend Batman would say. And the piggy gets some cash in his belly. Now, I'm guessing that some of you want to know how we can actually do this today. And on May 19, as it is for you, May 20 for me, this isn't actually possible. You'd actually need a fair bit of magic. But the good news is that a lot of the building blocks are already in place. So the first thing we need for building something like this is containers. I'm working on building out my POC using Docker. If you want to use Rocket, BSD jails, Solaris zones, or anything else, go right ahead. My focus is on the conceptual level rather than the individual implementation, which I think there'll be a lot of variations there. You're also going to need a scheduler for your containers because you don't want developers logging in and running Docker commands directly on servers. We want everything to be as automated as possible. I'd recommend Kubernetes for a scheduler. And as we go through this in a bit more detail, you'll see why containers can provide some real benefits here. But another piece we need is blue-green deployments. So for those of you who don't know, a blue-green deployment, we have our production environment here, and here are the changes that we want to get live. So what happens is we spin up a new production environment, which is a clone of the existing production. We make a copy of the files and database. Maybe with the files, it's just a case for symlink, or cloning the underlying volume for the storage. And we also, and then we have the new version of production. So what we can do here, if we're using containers, is just deploy a new instance of that container to production using environment variables and the like to inject the configuration we require. And we've got the database and files from the existing production environment. So that means that we then promote our new production, which we'll just call production from here on in. It now becomes blue and the old production goes away. So we have our new production environment up and running, and all we need to do is repoint a load balancer or something like that to direct the traffic to the new instance. It also means that if something goes wrong, we should have a copy of the database so we can perform a fast rollback. We just go back to making this one here, the production, and point the load balancer back at this production environment. But also means that we can do the deployment with little or no downtime. So the other thing is, once something lands in production, ideally we should use automation to merge these changes back into our pending sandboxes. If the merge fails, then it's the developer's job to resolve it. But if we can do it in an automated way, then why not have a machine do the work for us? That you're really going to need to use something like this is tests. And I like to think of tests like onions. They'll make people cry, and there's layers to them. Now, the key layers that for projects and Drupal projects in particular, you're going to want to have peer review, where one of the developers looks over the work of someone else who's proposing a change. They make sure that architecturally it's good, the general logic makes sense, the code's nice and easy to read. For things like linting, you should be using bots to ensure that the formatting is consistent. That shouldn't be something that peer reviews have to worry about these days. There's enough tooling for that. Then you should have some unit tests to actually check that the logic is good and that you don't have regressions from making other changes. And then we need integration tests to make sure that everything's tied together nicely and works properly. I've got a longer technical Environmentless talk that goes into more detail about this testing stuff. So for the people who are that way inclined, check it out on my YouTube channel. It's just youtube.com/squashed. And also, most organizations, they want to have user acceptance testing where the product owner or someone with authority can sign off on changes before they go live. But testing should be part of your process all the way through. So here in the sandbox, and again here in your builds. And if we're using containers, it makes it very easy to make multiple clones of an image and run a battery of tests against it. So you can actually get a lot of parallel testing as well. So to roll out something like this, you're going to need to build this out yourself at the moment. Unfortunately, none of the existing Drupal hosting vendors offer anything that is capable of doing these types of workflows, but maybe that will change in the future. Before I wrap up, I'll just run through a few of the benefits of using this type of model. So you move from having freezes and having to wait until the end of a sprint so you can deploy. You end up with a continuous delivery and continuous deployment model. So your changes can just constantly be going to production. And gone are the days of having to book in deployments. Ideally, this can be a self-service thing where the developers propose things, the product owner approves it, and it just goes live. So as soon as something's ready, it can go live for you. And the value of your work can be realized faster. So I think that when using Environmentless workflows, everything is awesome. So thank you, Sean, and thank you for allowing me to present today.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Are there any questions? Yes?
In the scenario where you had 2 builds, 1 failed, what happens if both builds don't fail and go to production? Don't we have a situation where we have to pick stuff again?
Okay, so Dave, you hear me?
Yep.
The question is, if you have 2 builds which pass, but in production have incompatibility, what happens then?
Okay, that's a great question. So the idea with this is that it's first in wins. So let's just go back through my slides. So here in this model, we'll pretend that the bugs aren't here, and we have both build 26 and 28 passing, but build 28.
We don't see the slides now.
Oh, sorry, I've stopped sharing my screen. I'm looking at it. I can see it. It looks great. Just give me 2 seconds to share my screen again. Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay, so here we have the build 26 and 28, we're pretending that they're both passing, but the product owner will approve one of these two to go live first. And so once build 28 goes live, then we will sync the changes. I think I've got a sync slide back here. Here. We've got arrows here showing the syncs. Now, if build 26 was passing, we would also sync back to build 26, and this would become build 29. It would run all the tests again, and then the product owner would pass it. Now, if there was incompatibility there, it would get picked up by the tests, and the developer would need to fix it before it can go live.
Okay. Answers for the question. Any other questions? Yes? Yeah?
Hi. So, question with the blue-green deployment. I assume that production runs on a cluster, so you have a container or a cluster with containers, and then you need to run an update script, for example, to update the database schema. So how do you do that? Do you just run that on one, so you log into one specific instance and then you run the updates there, or how does that work?
Yep. So we'll go back to this slide for a second. So yeah, in the scenario you're talking about, we still route traffic to the live production. Now, ideally, we'd run it in read-only mode. If you need to, you would put it in maintenance mode. And then on this new instance here, which would point to a separate clone of the database, on one of the nodes, you would run the hook update or anything else that needs to be run. Ideally, it would be part of a standard deployment script where, if needed, you would connect to that individual container and execute the commands. Maybe it's a case where you actually extend a container and deploy one for a short-term period just so it can run the updates while pointing to the correct database. I haven't fully worked through how those update processes are going to work in a real live environment. I've got lots of ideas of how to make it work when it's running on my laptop, but I don't think anyone's going to want to run everything off my laptop in production.
There was one more question.
I answered it myself.
Okay, okay. Then thank you very much. Thanks. Let's give him an applause.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave, for joining us remote. Next
No
time,
worries.
we want to see you in person.
Yeah, well, it will be my third business days next time, so I will try to get there.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
See you soon. Bye.
See you soon. Bye.